and practice and stay sharp with correlational thinking or correlative thinking. This is so important and so lacking in our society. Okay, when I try to teach some symbolism to like family members, let's say, I'll say, well, in this symbol, the all-seeing eye represents the light and the wisdom of the divine, of the Creator. And many of my family members will just stop me there and say, I totally don't understand what you mean. I cannot correlate or think of an eye inside of a triangle with some rays coming out of it as the Creator's wisdom. You know, the light of reason. How do you equate these two? I'm just trying to explain. It's like, let x equal 10 in algebra. You know, it's an arbitrary decision based on an archetypal form that people who use this symbol came up with. And glassy-eyed, you know, eyes glass over, they don't have this correlative thinking where they can say, let A be equal to B, okay? And give it a value and substitute. They can't do that. That's why, you know, I tutor algebra. It's one of the things I do for the fake form of money. You know, I tutor, you know, high school or college people in algebra. And you could tell right away who has correlative thinking active in them because they take to it, or if they don't have correlative thinking active, they have a real hard time with it. So correlative thinking is what symbolism ultimately fosters. And again, many people don't have it active in them. So, for example, if I establish that pen, the symbol of pen equals 20, okay, and then I also establish bird plus wheel equals 50. You follow me so far? Pen is 20, bird plus wheel equals 50. And finally, I establish pen and bird are equal to each other. Well, what does wheel equal? 30. Now, most people can't do that. Most people on the earth cannot do that. I'm serious. More people alive on the earth cannot do that than can, because they cannot engage in a simple correlation. I know most of my family members can't, and I'm not saying that to insult anybody, I'm just telling you how it is. The majority of human beings will not be able to provide the answer for the value of the wheel in that simple correlative exercise, which is simple algebra. And they couldn't explain why that answer is so. Because if pen and bird are equal to each other, since pen equals 20, bird must equal 20. Then we could go over here, plug in the value of 20 into that equation where the bird is at. 20 plus wheel equals 50. Wheel must equal 30. That's why it's so. You know, that's a simple proof of that. So symbolic illiteracy combined with the widespread absence of correlative thinking has made it dramatically easier for those who use their knowledge of symbols and archetypes to manipulate behavior at a subconscious level, because they can sneak messages into wherever they want and the person has no idea that there's an embedded message there and they have no idea what it means. That's how they do it. And that's why it's significant to study. Now, I'm going to give you a great example of archetypal symbolism applied for mental manipulation. And I tell people, if you want the first example to study about what the occult is, this is one of the examples to look into. This is what the occult is applied in life. This is mind control applied in life. It's not my interpretation of that, it's what it really is. It's not just clever marketing. It's occult concepts that some people know how they work and some people don't, applied for the purpose of one group of people getting what they want at the expense of another group of people. So keep that in mind as I explain the Betty Crocker conundrum. In the early 1950s, a perverted form of Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytical approaches, championed by Freud's nephew Edward Bernays, were sweeping across America, even to the point where the Central Intelligence Agency was using these psychoanalytical approaches for mass control of the population. A great book to read on this is Jim Keith's Mass mass control, the manipulation of human consciousness. A place where it proved very successful was in the unassuming kitchens of middle-class families. Betty Crocker Foods had produced an instant cake mix. All you needed to do was add water to the supplied powder. In that time, this was considered somewhat of a miracle, of a minor miracle. The problem was that the miracle cake mixture did not sell at all. And Betty Crocker put a lot of money into research and development to come up with this stuff. They didn't want to have to go back to the drawing board. They wanted to sell what they came up with. In other words, they wanted to make people want it. They didn't want to accept the decree that had been given them, we don't want this. So undaunted, Betty Crocker Foods turned to the science of psychoanalysis to help, quote, solve the problem that they had. In other words, to make people buy something that the company already knew they did not want. Instead of trying to provide a product they did want, they wanted people to want what they had already invested R&D money in and what they had already made and put out onto the shelves that was a complete flop. And there was a reason it was a complete flop, which we'll get to. Crocker hired a Madison Avenue ad campaign firm to investigate through psychoanalytical techniques the underlying reasons that the housewives did not want the cake mix. And they did this through many interview sessions with many housewives. The conclusion of the study was that although the average American housewife very much appreciated the convenience of the cake mix, she felt very guilty about deceiving her husband and family into thinking she had worked hard for them, when in fact she had done very little work and put very little of herself and her own love into the project, as she had done when making a cake from scratch, entirely from scratch. So she was feeling guilt inwardly at having kind of gotten off a little bit easy, not having to do as much work or invest as much time and energy and love into the project of making a cake for her family. The answer offered to Betty Crocker by the psychologists they hired was quite simple. All that needed to be done was to add 3 words onto the instructions on the box of cake mix. Add 1 egg. Add 1 egg. That's it. They just had to say, you provide an egg to this mixture. Now, what's the egg? It's an archetype. It's a symbolic original form. The egg is creative essence. In many ancient cultures, the egg represents the cosmos itself, the womb of creation, the sacred feminine essence from which all life springs. And again, it is the feminine fertility symbol. The egg is what the woman contributes to the birthing process. The egg, as one of the most important and ancient archetypal symbols, holds very deep, often subconscious correspondences to life, birth, and creation, making the entire process of making the cake more meaningful in the housewife's mind. In this way, she would, in proxy, be, quote, giving life to her husband and family by providing the egg. This is how the mind works at a subconscious level. Changing the recipe to add an egg to the mixture offered the guilty housewife a way out by doing more than adding just water, by adding an ingredient which was psychologically intertwined with her own life-giving and creative capabilities. She could assuage her guilt that she was feeling. The end result, sales of Betty Crocker's unwanted cake mix soared. And I couldn't find an original ad that had the 1 egg on it. This was when they ratcheted up the recipe to include 2 eggs. This is from the late 1950s. And you could, if you read this up close, if you blew this up and read up close, over and over again, they keep talking about the egg. It says, Betty Crocker brings you that special homemade goodness because you add the eggs yourself. You know, that, at the bottom, let me see if I can see it. It says, here we go. It's very small print. There are only 2 kinds of cake mixes. This is the only underlined nationally sold cake mix that lets you add the eggs. The only one that gives you that special homemade goodness. Yep. Light, fluffy cakes. They're made with famous soft silk cake flour, ... and you add the eggs. Over and over again, they keep re-emphasizing this in this one ad. No, it's all accidental. You don't need to know about any of this stuff. Symbolism is insignificant. It has nothing to do with what's going on in your mind at all. Let's look at some solar symbolism next. Again,